right, guys, welcome back. This episode of Made in Asia, the podcast about creators and entrepreneurs and the experience and transformation economies in Asia. Today, here with Julian Liu. He's a hotelier by heart, a designer by training, and a project director by profession. You've covered Cornell Hotel School, Gensler Design Studios, Kerry Group, Shangri-La. He's on the Hong Kong Tatler 500 list and co-owner of Mama Always Said here on Peel Street, where we are today. So fantastic to be on site. How's it going, Julian?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I didn't go to Cornell Hotel School. I went to actually design school at Cornell.
Oh, so
my education is
the
in
better
design.
part of Cornell, as they say.
I wouldn't say that. I have way too many friends in hotel school to say that.
Okay, we won't call anyone out. Cool. So, but obviously you have a strong interest in hotels and hospitality. So that's my shortcut connection there, why it would be in a hotel school in Cornell. But fair enough. So you obviously have an interesting perspective from a design angle on hospitality. So tell me, what's wrong with hospitality real estate these days?
Start with the easy questions first. There's nothing wrong, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything wrong with hospitality. It's just that it hasn't actually changed all that much, right? And so, I think that, the basic tenets of hospitality are the same. We sell sleep. And nowadays, it's more about selling an experience. And so I think most hotel companies, and if not all hotel companies, haven't adapted to that or been able to address that adequately. Especially now, obviously in the pandemic, the hospitality industry has essentially been decimated. And so to me, it's actually a really big opportunity for hotel companies to reinvent themselves, right? If you look at, say, hotel brands in Asia, everyone sort of has their strata. Well, we've just been pancaked. We're all now down at the base level. We all have to build ourselves back up.
Because of COVID,
Because of COVID.
Okay.
Because of COVID. And to me, it's a huge opportunity for any hotel company to really get a jump start as to, how do you redefine your brand? How do you re-engage with your guests and your clients? There's no magic 8-ball, and there's no, no one's going to know what hospitality is going to look like coming out of this. You could have asked me 6 months ago, am I optimistic? I'd be, yeah, absolutely optimistic. Things are going to be fine. The new normal is going to be the old normal. 2 weeks later, it's gloom and doom. We're all,
right. Was there a point where you figured out, this is not going to go away anytime soon, and we need to think a bit more comprehensively about this?
I think, a lot of our business, and a lot of the hospitality business in the region is in China. Mm-hmm. And China's recovery has been fairly amazing, coming out of COVID.
Absolutely.
You'll see occupancies are pretty much back to where they were last year. There's been a huge rebound, but that market is big enough, that domestic market in China is big enough that it can support itself. But everywhere else in the world, we're still struggling. I think that, when we started looking at, when we came out of it sort of in August, July, August, when China's picking up, I was fairly optimistic that things are going to, pretty much go back to normal fairly quickly.
For the rest of the world, basically.
For the rest of the world. The problem has been that we've just been reacting. Right? This whole year has just been, hotel companies reacting to what the situation is. There's no long-term planning. It's very difficult to have strategy when you're just trying to meet your payroll month to month. I would say that I was very optimistic in August, going to September, but then, Hong Kong had a spike, other countries in Southeast Asia had a spike, and our hotels that had just opened had to shut down again. And obviously now it's December, and we're going to this fourth wave that seems to be, possibly worse than the third wave. I'm a little bit more mixed, in my opinion, I would say. And it's gone back to sort of, let's just take it a week at a time or day at a time.
Yeah, because, this is very on the news, but today we're back to only 6 p.m. dining here in Hong Kong. So, that ruins your day if you're in a restaurant, no?
Yes. And it did. It did ruin my day.
Much sucks, right?
It kind of sucks. With this restaurant, we opened in end of last summer, while the Hong Kong protests were still going on. Not the greatest time to open a restaurant, but again, onward and upward, right? That's our plan. We're going to go for it, and we'll just adapt as things happen. A lot has happened since then. So we went from protests, we got through the protests, we had a normal November, then we had COVID, and then I think since we've opened, we've had maybe 1 or 2 quote unquote normal months.
Right.
But we've learned to adapt. And I think whether you're a restaurant or a small business owner or a hospitality company, you just have to adapt.
So you talked earlier about the big brands haven't really embraced that opportunity of change, really, right? Some of them now, you have staycation packages or something like that, but it's not really a big innovation wave that comes through the industry at this stage. It's like piecemeal, we'll do delivery from our F&B.
Right.
It's not really, innovation in hospitality doesn't come in waves, so like not with a bang, with a boom.
Yeah, I mean, these aren't innovations, they're reactions. They're reactions to what your market, it's basically reactions to how can you make money. Right.
Or how you keep making money, right? It's
staycation
survival, right?
was never, nobody planned to have a staycation hotels in Hong Kong, right? It's weird to have a staycation 20 minutes from your home. We never thought about doing takeout. We never thought about a lot of things. And, we would never have thought that our biggest revenue was going to be our restaurants, for example. But these are all reactions. Now, that's what we can do to make money and to cope. But a year from now, knock on wood that there's a vaccine and things are slowly picking up again. Well, what's the big, how do you reinvent yourself? Now, I see COVID, it's really actually a catalyst because we knew the trends going into COVID. Like, how was hospitality changing? How was technology changing hospitality? So we were looking at using technology to be a bit more convenient. We're still looking at, keyless entry, using automation, using IT for self-check-in and things like that, that now we actually have to go much faster than how we envisioned that before, because now it's gone from nice to have to an almost we need to have this. But at the same time, how do you get to, or how do you use technology but still maintain that sort of that sense of hospitality? I think one of the big dangers of using technology is that you lose that human touch. Now, I think that if anything, what COVID has exposed is that, as human beings, we still need that human-to-human interaction. After, my kids, for example, they've been doing Zoom for over a year.
For school, right?
For school.
Yeah.
And, just being able to go back to school for a few weeks this past month has been great for them, right? It's almost like this relief that they've been able to interact with their friends. And so I think that's never going to change. Humans are always going to need that face-to-face interaction, that sort of human touch. There's nothing more frustrating than, calling and say, if you've ever had to fix your cable in the US and you call customer service, for English, press 1, for this, press 2, at some point, like, just talk to me. And it's sort of, and technology doesn't have empathy. And I think a huge part of being successful in hospitality is having empathy for your guests, understanding what they want, even before they even tell you, right? And if we can use technology to make us more empathetic, to almost be to give us an insight into what the customer wants before they ask for it, I think that makes us better hoteliers.
Now, do you think that's a privilege for the higher paying guest, or is this something that should be through all the tiers of hospitality come at a budget level? Or, at one point you're just saying, this is like a 7-Eleven of hotels, which is heads in beds and it's clean, you got Wi-Fi, you got a shower, and please don't expect anybody to welcome you. Well, what's your opinion about it?
I think, that has to be irrespective of tiers. It should never be the way that we treat a guest shouldn't be transactional. You pay more, I treat you better, is counter to everything that, hospitality is about.
Treat you better, but you get more, right? So the human interface is a bit more. You can still have a great interaction only with technology, particularly. I mean, there's some people that would be perfectly happy not to meet anyone, but
I think that if you are the kind of guest that you don't want that interaction, or you just essentially want to be left alone, then your hotel operator should know that this guest wants his privacy, get him to the room, and that's it. Let him do what he wants to do. If you have another guest that wants that interaction, then you give him that interaction.
How do you know that, though? Through your CRM, you have your record on file? Or?
It should be through whatever data you have on that particular guest, on your guest profile, what their likes and dislikes are. And I don't think it should be, you pay more, you get treated better. You pay more, you get a bigger room. You get more amenities. But I don't think hospitality should be transactional.
Yeah. Now, even if you have that sort of down in terms of the interaction and hospitality, human touch, let's put it that way, it doesn't mean you have a great experience, right? I mean, a great experience is a bit more than just running the routine of hospitality. A smooth check-in, maybe a hi, how are you, a little bit of interaction. Doesn't mean you have, that's expectations to some extent, right? I mean, a great experience is a bit more than that. So where does that come from?
Right. So, I mean, a part of what I do coming from a design background, having, been on the design side of hotels and being on the project side of hotels, what we engage in more is about designing an experience. There's a base experience that every hotel should get right, which is fast check-in, reasonable food, clean room, warm shower. That's the basics that anyone is going to. But then how do you?
Still some fail on that. But
yes, I'm not going to say.
You're not going to call anyone out.
I'm not going to say anyone's perfect. Everybody fails at something. But that should be the aspiration. And so if that's your baseline, then how do you take it to the next level? How do you build brand loyalty? And I don't think you can build brand loyalty through transactions. It has to be through experience. And so how do you get the guest that's, will pay for the presidential suite and the guest that pays for your standard, your standard room should have that same sense of loyalty. Yeah. And that's.
So you still believe in loyalty that exists, loyalty to a brand or loyalty to a property or to a staff or to a team member or a general manager? What is loyalty?
It's sort of, I mean, I don't, it's called sort of cop-out answer. It's to all. Right? Okay. And so if you have a good GM and the guests gets to know the GM and they're loyal to the GM, that's one sense of loyalty. I think loyalty to the staff, to a certain degree, is actually more important than loyalty to a property. Because loyalty to staff, that's pure service.
Which works in Hong Kong quite well, right?
Yes.
The scheme of things of different cities, it's actually not too bad here.
Yeah, but loyalty to a property has to do with something has to do with how nice the property is, right? Whereas that has to do with budgets and design and how good your construction is. Whereas loyalty to staff, I think there's something inherent in that, and there's something more pure in that. That's just them being a good operator or being hospitable, or having good service that goes beyond, and that actually having good service to a certain degree can make up for, if you have, you have an older hotel that needs renovation, but if your service is at that level, you still build loyalty, and people are willing to forgive a multitude of sins if that service is good.
Right. And the brand is then sort of the beneficiary of that service loyalty sort of interaction.
Yeah, no one has loyalty to a brand unless they have loyalty to the staff, loyalty to service.
Unless they sort of get told this is a great brand and they suck it up, basically.
They suck it up, but if you get told that this is a great brand, then it's up to every single property underneath that flag to have to meet that guest expectation. And that's a much more difficult proposition.
Well, at the same time, they can get too procedural and too driven on standards and all that, and it hollows out the service experience, right? There's no more, how do you say? It's not really an individualized service anymore. So the protocol can get quickly into the way. I mean, there's some brands in the past used to be like that. They have saying, oh, there's a distance, you have to greet someone. It becomes very scripted, and it takes away the for lack of a better word, authenticity of the human interaction, right? It felt a bit like this bunch of uniforms and they jump around and do what they've been sort of trained to do. Right?
Yes, and that's, I think any new hotel or any new hotel brand is going to suffer from that. But that's always going to be the starting point. So I've been I've checked into hotels that I've actually worked on, that I've been part of the team, and I've been asked, "Oh, is this your first time here?" And my answer is no. It's sort of like, did you check my guest profile? But you can't blame the person for that. They don't know who you are yet. They're just started in the job. They're following the script that we've given them to follow. But if they do it on your second shift, then there's something wrong. It's very hard. You can't teach authenticity. And that goes back to just finding the right people for the right positions. And having good team leaders that lead by example.
Now, as a designer, you're very far removed, supposedly, from that human touch. How does that come together? Design before it becomes human, right? The real estate process is usually brick and mortar first,
right?
And the operator will take care of it. No, isn't that the mentality? To some extent.
Yes, when it comes to hotel planning and hotel design, basically our job is don't screw it up for the operator. Make it easy to operate so that they don't have to.
In a best case scenario.
In a best case scenario, it makes the better job we do. It makes it much easier for them, and we don't get as many complaints. And so, if you're building a hotel and you've taken what operators' concerns are, and you've designed a hotel that's really built for an operator, it makes their job easier. And the happier they are, the happier the guests are going to be. Right? You don't want your housekeeping to be stressed out because this room is so difficult to clean. And it's designed the way that, they have to finish the room in half an hour, but they know it's going to take them 45 minutes. So what's going to happen? They're going to start to cut corners. And that just translates to a bad guest experience.
Yeah. Now, in your role, do you look at everything from sort of soup to nuts, right? Real estate, architecture, interior design, back of house, the full...
Yeah, from concept development of, what that hotel experience should be, to handing the keys to the GM and saying, it's your problem now.
Okay. So, and how do you define or how do you categorize those experiences? Do you have like a couple of drawers where you say like, oh, here we have a city hotel resort? Oh, I get it. But there got to be a bit more, no? You should have a few more registers to play with.
Yeah, it's not that straightforward. You have your quote-unquote template. So a city hotel should have X, Y, Z. You tick the boxes. Or a city resort or resort should have this. It's more about understanding where your location is. One of the phrases that gets used a lot by designers is always this idea of sense of place. And it sometimes doesn't get interpreted correctly. It's not so much, some designers interpret sense of place as it needs to look a certain way in terms of having design characteristics, colors, motifs, patterns that are reflective of the local culture. That's part of it. To me, sense of place, or a deeper sense of place, is sense of community. So what does it actually feel like to live in that city, to really get a local experience within the four walls of your hotel? That's a much more difficult thing to do. How do you reach out? And part of that is also how do you engage with the local community? Too often, hotels are like fortresses. And as you come through the doors, it's the guest experience. But the guest experience, sometimes we worry too much about the guest that's not from that city, not from that neighborhood. How does that hotel become part of that neighborhood is a much more difficult thing to do. And that's one of the challenges that I think we're going to see moving forward.
So you're saying the facade will become more permeable towards the local clientele, and
it's more than that. It's how do you make that hotel feel like it caters to the neighborhood rather than caters to somebody that's temporary.
So is that a commercial decision, or you think that's, how much is that driven by a commercial approach? We're saying there's money to be had here. What are we doing? Or is it, Machiavellian sort of, let's give these people what they deserve. I don't know.
Let them eat cake.
I didn't say that, but
no, it's not that at all. It's not that at all. I think it's it's part of it is if somebody wants authentic experience, you can only recreate that to a certain degree. But in order to create an authentic experience, you need authentic people. And if you don't open your doors to your surroundings, you're not inviting authenticity in. I think hotels now should be more about, and the way I see it, there are sort of, if you take larger hotels, so you've got 5-star, 400, 500 key hotel, you're engaging the city as a whole. And so say if you were a hotel in New York, you should be representative of all of New York, right? And to a certain degree, some of it is quite superficial. If you're a boutique hotel, say you're in Brooklyn, you should be representing your neighborhood. And so your concierge should be able to tell you not what the best restaurant or the best steak place is in all of New York, but where's your local steak restaurant? And so by doing that, you're also supporting local businesses, and you get loyalty from the local businesses as well. So they take basically they become part of your success.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the big box brand names, if you want to call them, don't necessarily have that in their script. No, more often than not, the brand identity is so overpowering. It's changing now as well, but if you go back to 10 years, it was really, there's a logo, there's a brand, here's the founder's portrait in the lobby, and take it or leave it. I mean, that was an approach that
yes.
lasted for generations.
And that was about planting a flag. I think as a response to the pandemic, all of a sudden, oh my God, there's a local market. How do we reach that local market? And so moving forward, it should become obvious to everybody that we can't neglect that local market. That how do you build brand loyalty within your own city? It goes beyond your restaurants. It's how do you, turn, your brand as part of the fabric of that city? How do you engage with your local clientele? I think that's sort of the more interesting part of what's going to happen.
Then we're back to staycations, isn't it? It's delivery.
It's delivery service.
Which has its own challenges. Nothing wrong with delivery. It's put this way. We heard from Zhao. It's a whole different ballgame. Nothing easy to pull off. But okay, so you mentioned designing a hotel, and you said you have the experience you want to create, right? So how is that process then? You said, okay, city hotel, we want to be part of the neighborhood. What do you look at, like street level accessibility? There's an outdoor dining, and it's sort of is it that, or I mean, do you have different elements? Do you play around with different areas? Do you focus? Is the pool for everyone? Is it just for hotel guests? I mean, where do you draw a line? The gym could be outdoor, like a public gym, which access massive ones. You build a few, right? Yeah. What's this process? Where do you start?
It's first understanding. It's first understanding the neighborhood and understanding, what are the characteristics of the neighborhood? Why do people go to that neighborhood? And engaging that local population, that neighborhood, within your hotel, reflecting what their values are, what they want to see in a hotel. It's about getting local experience, local intelligence. I think the most successful projects I've done is when you go in and you have to be aware that you actually know nothing, right? You go in with a lot of preconceptions as to what this place should be like. You have your brand standards that you have to adopt, but you have to go in with a very open mind and say, I know nothing, right? So I have to understand what this community is about.
So how much time do you spend on that, on this scouting?
Sometimes it will take months. And I think what's important so a lot of times, when we hire a designer, traditionally the owner has a brief, the brand or the operator has a brief, you pass it to the designer, like, go and design this. I think the most successful projects I've done is when we've hired a designer and say, let's go discover this together. Let's actually work together. Before I can tell you what to design, let's work together on a brief. Let's work together on the vision. And I find that level of interaction creates a much more successful project, because then you set up a brief for that hotel that you carry all the way through, and you've done your research and you've done your homework, that you have confidence at the end of the day, what you're going to get is successful.
So the vision comes from a designer and from a
designer and operator.
The designer at the operator level, but not necessarily the operator, right? Or they kind of input you as well, from the F&B team, they will say.
So the way that we work in my company is that, we will bring in local expertise that we have in that region. We'll bring in people from our headquarters who have, who focus on F&B, who focus on health club and spas, and operating GMs to give their input, give their experience, and then together we craft that concept brief.
Okay.
So how do all the components of this hotel work? How does that hotel engage the local community? What F&B offerings are going to work, within that neighborhood?
Okay. So the focus there is mostly on the F&B part of it rather than the room product.
But also with rooms. And so with rooms, you'd say, so how can we make that guest experience better? What choices are we going to give to the guests? What do the guests really want? And so we'll study, say, how do people actually use hotel rooms? A few years ago, I was doing a study just internally. I was asking people, so, as people in the hotel industry, we travel very often. So we, a lot of times we stay at our own hotels and we stay at other people's hotels. So give me a timeline from check-in to check-out. What do you actually do? And it's interesting because I found that everyone's actually very different, right? And so you can't really follow the standard template. For example, once I check in to a hotel, I close the door and I don't leave my room. I basically just want to de-stress and relax. Whereas other people will, immediately jump in the shower and they're right out the door again because they don't want to stay in the hotel room. They want to go explore. Other people will go straight to the gym just to work up the sweat.
Check out the pool or do a tour, right? Take some photos,
and so understanding how people use rooms, understanding how people use your facilities and being able to cater to them, essentially 24 hours a day, is the challenge.
And so you've been doing this for a couple of years now, I guess. Has that evolved sort of your approach? I mean, what have you learned or that to refine, to optimize your process or to level up?
It's still so when I moved back to Hong Kong 2003, and I started actually in doing real estate. So it was in sort of commercial and residential development, so nothing to do with hotels at all. And then eventually doing mixed-use projects, really starting to work with hotel operators. Like, this is pretty interesting. These guys are crazy, but this is interesting. And that's how I sort of segued into hospitality. And so going into the very beginning, it was all about sort of creating this 5-star luxury. It was more focused on design. How do you create this beautiful interior? And it wasn't as I've been doing this longer, you started to understand what are the operator's concerns? How do you design a hotel? How do you plan a hotel better so that the operator succeeds? It's not just about having fancy finishes and cushions and all that stuff. In fact, most operators don't want that because they're difficult to clean. So it's striking that balance with creating something that's sort of aesthetically beautiful and pleasing and attractive to the guests, but making it easy enough to operate. And then now that new layer is how do you create that? How do you add that layer of experience? How do you make that more accessible to the hotel guests as well as keeping your operators happy?
Okay, and so you kind of tell the operator this is sort of what we're trying to do, and they buy into it in the process of defining the details.
They have to be part of that process. If they don't buy into it, it's not going to work, right? And the key is just being very open to say, if you don't think it's going to work, why is it going to work? Because obviously we've come in with preconceptions of how you do your job. Where can we make it better? And only until they are happy do we actually move forward, because then there's no point. Because the moment you finish, they're going to start complaining, right? This is not going to work, and then you've sort of design is about problem solving. If you haven't solved the problem, then you basically failed.
Right. You haven't done your job.
Right.
So in all of this, what happens to the brand? I mean, does the brand get elevated because you've been doing well on you've been doing a better job at creating experience, which then reflects back on the brand and brings up that as a recognition? Where's the transformation from this cookie cutter brand to something that's like, oh, they're part of the neighborhood all of a sudden, and
Right.
it becomes cool, I guess?
Yeah, cool's a dangerous word. You could apply cool to hotels that aren't great, but they're cool. It starts off with at a property level. And so if you create experience that engages your foreign guests and engages your local guests, you build loyalty to that property. And hopefully when they travel, they see, oh, there's another of these hotels in this city. Let's give them a try. The challenge is now you have to live up to that brand expectation. And it's maintaining that brand expectation across, multiple hotels is the biggest challenge.
Particularly older ones that were designed maybe
right
a decade or two ago with a very different approach, right?
Right. And that's actually going to be the challenge moving forward. So, right now, most hotel companies are essentially bleeding cash, right? In order to maintain their payrolls, in order to upkeep the hotels. So all your CapEx for the next year or next 2 years in terms of renovations is going out the window. So, our focus these days is how do we keep the wheels from falling off the car? And so the focus has to be on keeping these buildings functioning on a purely technical level, right? Air conditioning has to work, right? The power has to work. People have to feel comfortable. And so how do you then reinvent a brand when your hotel is 20 years old? Then it comes back to service. It comes back to engaging with the staff. Now, how do you want your staff to engage with your guest, when you're wearing a face mask? So, as human beings, we inherently smile when we're happy. And you're supposed to smile when you greet a guest. Well, how do you do that when you have a mask on, right? And that's really what it boils down to. You have a barrier. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's psychological. How do you get through that barrier and convey a sense of hospitality, convey a sense of welcome? And that's going to be challenging.
That's a temporary challenge, I would believe, right? That you cannot have the full interaction. I mean, I have trouble recognizing people in the street. They wave at me, and I'm like, "Who is that?" And I only have half the face to tell who they are, right?
Yeah.
And that makes it even more difficult in a service encounter, as you say. So, but I doubt it's going to be permanent. The way, I mean, COVID will be around for another year or so, but as you say, maintaining that service standard will probably be more difficult in that way, right?
I mean, it's the way I see it. It's there are certain aspects of human behavior that I think are going to be permanently affected by all this. You can't get through 2 years of a pandemic and not be permanently affected. There are certain things that will go back to, sort of the new normal, and some of the new normal will be the old normal. So we still want that interaction, but what do we look for now? As a hotel guest, what do we look for? Nobody knows. It's everyone. Everyone's just guessing. Anyone who's telling you they have the answer is kidding themselves.
Right.
There's going to be a scar. There's going to be a psychological scar after this, just like there was after 9/11, just like there was after the recession 2008. It will affect behavior. How much it affects behavior depends on how fast we recover and how do we, what our reaction is going to be in the next year.
Arguably, human memory is kind of not the strongest if it comes to everyday behavior. So things will permeate, probably will go back to behavior that we've observed before, which was fairly organic or natural, apart from little bags in the airport that you have to put into the X-ray machine and security. But otherwise, unless it's mandated by somebody, you go back to what's most comfortable to you, right? Unless somebody says, "Oh, you have to wear a mask," even if somebody tells you, not everybody does it. That aside, but you'll find back your groove and your style, unless you're either paranoid about it or somebody tells you you need to act in that way. No?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think all of a sudden will be, not everyone's going to turn into a hypochondriac in a year. And we will pretty much go back to what we were last year. But we are going to be more aware of cleanliness. We're going to be more aware of hygiene. We are going to think differently about health, what we eat. We'll be more conscious about exercise. And these are things that are not going to be very obvious changes in human behavior, but it will happen. I mean, we are already more conscious about maintaining our health. You can't, I think the level of hygiene, level of cleanliness in hotels has to be stepped up. And I don't expect the sort of the hospitalization of hospitality, but, certain things that just are not going to be acceptable anymore. Yeah. So we just have to be more careful with what we do and be more thorough with what we do.
So speaking of the wellness part and health, obviously there's to me it's like a 3-step kind of thing. First, you need to recognize, health, is something that exists and maybe I should care about. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of realizing that, I have to do something. And then it's actually doing it, right? It's like realization, acknowledgement, and then execution, if you want, or action, right?
Yeah.
It works different probably at different sort of tiers of society, if you want, right? Sort of more higher spending guests is probably a little bit ahead in the curve. Where do you see that happening for the broader market, that wellness and health, unless it's designed, it's like in a passive way that you have to walk more, right? You can have different tools of design that create a wellness or what do you call it? I think it's a well standard now, right? For design. Where does that become sort of mainstream, let's put it?
I think it's actually, I don't necessarily think it's about guests that have, if you're a higher spend guest, you have more, you're more conscious of it. I think everyone's more conscious now of health. It's giving guests choices and opportunities for engaging in activities that are healthier. And it goes beyond just having a gym or a spa. It's having menu options. It's, having the option of, if you want a yoga mat in your room, it's having more outdoor space for people to get fresh air. I think people have started, and I count myself within that group, have sort of gained a sort of a greater appreciation for the great outdoors.
Particularly during COVID.
especially
Who's not hiking?
COVID.
Come on.
A year ago, you wouldn't have caught me dead hiking. I was like, what do I want to walk around for? And now I have to do it just to get outside, just to get some fresh air. If anything, being stuck in Hong Kong since February, I walk more.
Yeah.
I started walking around where I live, which I never did before.
Before you probably walked more at the airport or, on traveling and all that. Or in a city you visited and then you walked there, right, to explore the neighborhood, things like that. And now you're like, let's check out my own neighborhood.
No, that's actually true. I'm walking around my own neighborhood.
Yeah. And Hong Kong's not bad for that. There's a lot to discover. And, you have to be very attentive to details, right, to see.
Well, I think one of the great benefits of living in Hong Kong, it is a very small place, but it has these sort of weird microclimates everywhere. You could walk to the beach, and be in the city in 20 minutes, or you can go up to a mountain in 15 minutes. You have a lot of options in a very small space. It makes it very convenient.
Yeah, spoiled almost, and then you say, what do I do this weekend, right?
Exactly the same thing I did last weekend.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So in the beginning, we talked about innovation in hospitality. So it's still a bit of a challenge, I think, overall. Some people joke that the biggest innovation was folding the toilet paper in the bathroom in a different way. What do you see that has happened in the past? Technology, right? Keyless access to the room, check-in. Where else do you see that innovation has really come full circle or really made an impact?
It's a tough question.
Well, where do you think there needs to be some innovation? What's something that's not working right now?
I think the approach to F&B has changed quite a bit, and that's been a response to how local restaurants and how standalone restaurants have been innovating, have become more creative, have looked, their menus have changed to adapt to local tastes, and hotel restaurants tend to be the last to react to those. And now there's been more of a push to...
Sorry, who do you blame in that case? The operator? Or is it the owner? Or, I mean, where does it usually fall? That is it a matter of cost and capex that people don't want to spend that, or it's been working all along? Why fix why fix it if it ain't broke? Or where does the hotel F&B experience fall off the bandwagon?
I think it's because F&B's relatively small component of a hotel's revenue, and so there isn't that as big a drive to spend money to change.
Okay.
Whereas if you're a local restaurateur, you have to adapt much more quickly, or you're going to lose your shirt. Take this restaurant for example. When we opened, we were a Malaysian restaurant, and once COVID hit, we realized that and I'm Malaysian. I love the menu, and I was very hesitant. I know the concept works. I don't really want to change it. And our partners who are operating the restaurant said, look, we have to change because the market dynamic has completely changed and your competition is going to be different now. And so we have to adapt. And so, it was a humbling experience. Basically, it's like, okay, so I know nothing. and they were right. This restaurant has succeeded after changing the concept. It was doing fine before. It's doing better now, even in a situation like a pandemic. So local restaurateurs have that drive, and they have they're a little bit more dynamic in how they approach their business, and they can adapt to the changing market. Hotel restaurants tend to be less so.
More reactive in that way,
yeah. I mean, and, if you were to look at a lot of the hotel restaurants in Hong Kong, they haven't actually changed all that much.
No, I have not. Yeah, it's 20 years and still going strong.
Right. They have a built-in audience, and they tend to be very, very good restaurants, and they have their own following. But they're not as driven as standalone restaurants to innovate.
Yeah, I think that's a big change in Asia where, say 30 years ago when a lot of the sort of first wave of hotels, international chains came about, they had this sort of recognition with the traveler, and then over time they built up maybe a following with the local community. And at some point that sort of spawned those independent restaurants, right? And then competition was real. And I mean, there's still a lot of hotels you would go to and you would never think to go walk into the restaurant. I mean, I still don't. I mean, this is, for me, it's a bit bizarre to go downstairs. Unless it's a matter of convenience, or even the bar is like, okay, I mean...
Well, it's because hotel restaurants already have a built-in client base. Everyone's going to eat breakfast there for the most part. Your hotel guests are a captured audience. So if you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, maybe you don't feel secure about going out and trying a new restaurant because you're worried that you can't communicate. And so you go to your hotel restaurant, figured out the food's got to be, good enough. They speak
You hope
English.
So, at least.
You hope so. It should be. It should be.
Yeah.
And so it's relatively safe. It's a safe choice, and but nowadays, people's expectations are much higher. And I think you're starting to see hotel restaurants in Hong Kong are actually starting to push the envelope a little bit.
Back, yeah. And we see those that are third-party operated too, right? Some hotels, it's been there to lease out, but those concepts tend to be, or can be, a bit stale. But now we see actually quite sort of high-flying restaurant groups coming in and doing their thing, right? So
and it's also, and it goes beyond. So I mean, traditionally, a lot of hotels have invited, say, these star chefs to come in and put their name on a restaurant. Now, there's still that, but they're inviting local chefs with the local following to come in and put their name. You don't necessarily have to be your Yannick Elenos or your Wolfgang Box or these sort of global names.
Yeah.
Sometimes having a strong local chef with a local following builds enough into your brand that you become more localized.
What do you make of like these celebrity chefs that have 40 stars or I don't know how many, 20 restaurants? Ducasso, Bulut, obviously being the big ones. What when you talk about design experience, do you think these kind of restaurants have their place in the landscape, and every major city should have one or two of those, or what's your take on?
No, they have their place. They definitely have their place. As long as they're consistent. If you go, say, to Robuchon, the experience you have there is probably the same as you had a few years ago because their food is consistently good. Now, is it the food any different from what it was 3 years ago? You'd hope so.
Hope so. Some hope, yeah. See if the chef comes around once a year or twice a year, or
the successful star chefs, they maintain their quality and they maintain a certain level of innovation, and they keep changing and adapting as well. And that's what makes them, and it's sort of their sign of quality that you're going to get a good meal and a good experience when you go to those restaurants. And the moment that starts to fade and you don't have a good experience, and then their name means nothing.
Absolutely. Now, you've designed hotels in Shanghai, Beijing, a bunch of city around Asia, right? And you mentioned earlier that the local consumer is getting more sophisticated, right? Sort of more demanding.
Yes.
It's also something John on our previous episode mentioned as well. That's why bars are becoming, cocktail culture is booming more. Do you see any differences between one city and another? How does that express itself? Or is it, would you say, it's just a general more demanding consumer?
In general, it's more demanding, and it's because people, and part of it is social media. Right? People see different experiences. You can witness an experience that somebody else had halfway around the world, and although you're not experiencing that, it does open your perspective, and it does make you think, oh, I want that experience. Now, if you can offer something similar in your neighborhood, in your backyard, then that becomes immediately attractive.
Right.
So I think the F&B guests are getting a little bit more discerning. They also are, to a certain degree, it's almost like online shopping, right? So you can read about somebody else's experiences at a restaurant, the click of the mouse. It's so bad reviews go just spread quickly. Good reviews spread quickly.
Yeah. And the you have reviews or not. At the end of the day, you have a recovery program. That's your operator taking care of it. From a design process, though, where do you? Oh, look at that! Who's in the house? Phil Kim, instigator, man of We got to thank him, actually. So shout out Phil Kim, Journey Partnership. If everybody designs anything, will you recommend, or is this
Yes.
Yes.
Where's Phil?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway, shout out to Phil. Sorry, so we're talking about design and how. Okay, there's a service part which you can influence really as a designer, right? But bringing it back to the change of talked about how there's a more sophisticated consumer coming about. So how do you change your design for that? Which is not the operational part, right, or service related?
It isn't because most F&B operators will have a certain idea as to what kind of experience they want to create, and it's up to the designer to create that opportunity. And so if there's, I'll give you an example for a project that I'm working on right now. We're doing this sort of Asian grill house restaurant, and our F&B team has got a very specific idea as to what they want to offer and the vibe that it should be. And notions of they want to be able to see the fire on the grill, to give that, people want to see a little bit of theater.
Yeah.
They wanted to have a chef's table that's integrated into the kitchen. And so you take that as a design brief and you plan that, within your four walls, and you design it so that, or you work, in my case, working with the designer to say, look, this is the kind of thing that we want to do. And sort of give them a brief that allows them to understand that sense of what we're trying to achieve. And
so in F&B in particular, things like sort of celebrating, or the theater you mentioned, the fire. I mean, the old days it was a flambe. That was your theater. Nowadays you have a guacamole trolley.
Right.
Churrascaria has been around for a long time, but that was something that's going on. Open kitchens seem to be everywhere nowadays.
Yeah.
Very common part of a restaurant experience. So some bars, they make dessert, gelato at your table, all of this stuff, right? So is that something that you see has taken off, or it's just changed that it's become more accessible and it's moved out of the fine dining into more of a broader market?
I would actually think, it's, I'll put it this way. So in smaller neighborhood restaurants, you get to know the chef, you get to know the staff. In fine dining restaurants, traditionally, what you're talking about is more of a show. You're going to see the convergence of that. Even in a fine dining restaurant, you want the chef to come out. He doesn't want to be this mystery guy in the back, and you want that human interaction. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he comes out and he does something, he's not a clown. He's not there to perform at your table, but to come in and to explain a dish. And people are much more sophisticated now with what they eat. I think going back to this COVID experience, people are cooking at home more. People are learning to make cocktails at home, and so they want to learn. I think everyone has basically taken these few months to kind of learn something or do something different, purely because they have more time.
Yeah.
Right? They're not rushing to the airport anymore. They're not sitting on a plane for 13 hours. You have more time on your hands, so do something different. And so people are becoming more sophisticated because they're becoming more educated. And that's through their own experiences. That's through, watching YouTube or looking on Instagram and looking at experiences and saying, how do you do that?
Yeah. So one thing about that with Instagram, and also John mentioned, there's no more surprises in hospitality or in F&B, because everything is sort of, you read the review or you get the Instagram or there's a video, they pour the olive oil over the chocolate and it collapses, whatever, right? So do you still look to surprise guests in design when you approach something? Or, there's some places that have a real aha moment, but the second time you walk through that fridge door or phone booth into a club or into a bar, it's kind of an old hat, right?
Yes. So that means you have to keep changing. And you have to keep on updating your menus. It has to be seasonal. It has to be ingredients that, adapt with, what's around. You use vegetables that are in season, or you change your menu every few months just to keep people coming back. Just so that, when people look back at Instagram, it's like, oh, I had that a year ago. It has to be different.
Right.
And that has its own sets of challenges.
Absolutely. Now, since you're in design, a quick question about BIM, building information modeling. Is that something and then we'll talk about sustainability as well.
Sure.
What do you make of, sustainability should be a no-brainer by now, but BIM is something a bit more exotic still in Hong Kong. Where do you see, is that something good, something that should be done more, or what's your take?
I think it's becoming more and more integrated into what we do. That it's very soon going to be an essential tool. Bigger property companies, they have their own BIM teams. That's all they do. I've only used it a few times in some of my projects, and I'll admit that I don't fully understand it, but it's an incredibly powerful tool when it's used correctly. And in order for it to be used correctly, it needs to have level of dedication and devoted to it. Otherwise, like any tool, if you don't use it correctly, then it's pretty much you might as well not use it.
And buy-in from all parties. In the process.
Everybody has to buy in. Everybody has to buy in. Literally buy in. They have to buy in on the cost, right? There's a cost attached to that. They have to appreciate it for what it does. Otherwise, you're not using to its full advantage. So I've used it. I used it recently on a project in Australia, where it was an older property that we were renovating and looking at redevelop, and our engineers went in and they used BIM and they used their the scanning technology to essentially map all our, the entire building systems in that hotel. And so when you can tie that into your property management software, then that becomes incredibly powerful tool. So essentially you have your building in the cloud.
Right.
You have this virtual building that allows you to maintain your building a lot easier. And then obviously it's going to help you make it more efficient, which saves cost.
Yeah, that's somewhat underappreciated by many of the people in the process. I mean, not everybody has embraced it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's because people don't. And the costs are coming down, but it is also something that is difficult to understand, and not everybody fully understands it, and people tend to be wary of what they don't understand.
Right. Fair enough. In interest of time, I believe sustainability, you can just say, yes, let's do it. I mean, is that a fair... Yeah, you want to give a bit more color to it? I have a few closing questions, so we don't want to overrun too much.
Yeah, I think it's essential.
Yeah.
Not only for us today, but the next generation of hotel guests, which is essentially my kids. For them, it's just part of their every single decision that they make now. There is it's in the back of their mind. So if you don't address that now, then you're going to be sort of behind the times and it'll be too late. But hotels are very wasteful, and how do you address sustainability and still keep choice, keep service?
Yeah. Any of the standards you subscribe to, you should say, so the LEED is the one to go to, or EDGE, or there's so many. I mean, it's a bit difficult to to figure out if there's a stand. Is there a gold standard, or is it just you pick whichever one works for you?
It's a tricky question. LEED is the most internationally recognized standard, but it may not necessarily be the best standard. In my experience, we go with whatever the local standard is, and we adapt to that. Okay. And so in our projects, we use, say, LEED Platinum as a minimum, and then we go to the local standard.
Wow. Okay.
Just because it also helps with approvals. At the end of the day, it helps with approvals.
Absolutely. Okay. To close out, so a bit of advice from you. Anybody who's looking to start their own hotel, from a design perspective, any piece of advice what you would tell them? Go to a hotel school.
Go to business school. Anybody that wants to start a hotel or wants to design a hotel.
People that say start a hotel. It can be big, can be small, right? Guest house, whatever. But wants to get into the accommodation, the lodging business as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. In your podcast with John about the diplomat, you asked him the question, if anybody opened a bar, he said it's like, do you want to have another child? It's a similar answer. You need to have an inherent sense of service, right? You want to be happy making other people happy, and if you do it for glory, don't do it at all. If you do it to put a feather in your cap, don't do it. Hotels are incredibly difficult things to operate, and everybody has to get in the same wavelength. It's really a marriage, right? You're putting your guest in front of you, ahead of you, and if you can't do that, then don't. Right? If it's for ego, don't do it. It's
not the business to be in. It's easier ways.
Yeah. When I was doing mixed use projects in China, the hotel is there for the brand, but it's the loss leader. Right? You build the hotel to set the brand in order to sell your apartments to make money. And after that, you're on your own.
That's a mixed use game anyway, right?
Yes,
I mean, standalone
exactly right.
hotels will be. There won't be so many coming about anymore. I mean, it's a very rare breed nowadays to have a standalone hotel.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely how hotel properties are going to turn into lifestyle properties. It's not just about selling rooms, selling sleep anymore. They're going to be essentially the way I see hotels in the future. It's basically a network of lifestyle products, and that network's going to enable you to sell a whole range of products and services. be it from co-working spaces or their social clubs or F&B or spa experiences, or even down to just selling products.
So you have a few microcosms sort of coexisting under the umbrella of the hotel property. Basically, you have
hotel becomes a lifestyle brand. It's not just a hospitality. Like what we define as hospitality is going to broaden. It's not just about selling hotel rooms. We're not innkeepers anymore. Right? We're selling a lifestyle experience.
Well, at the same time, you have the hotelization of real estate, where in shopping malls you have more the whole pop-up scene and more F&B becoming right now that retail is going online. It's becoming more of a lifestyle experience there. Even in offices, you have more of a service component coming in. So do you see that sort of?
There's going to be a convergence. The
right.
lines are going to blur a lot more.
And who's going to drive that? It seems hoteliers are extremely reluctant to step outside of their property and even manage something across the street. They're like, why should I be there?
At the end of the day, it comes back to the owner.
Okay.
Right? The owner says, I'm going to build a mixed-use deal, and I want you guys to, if you don't want it, I'll find somebody else to do it.
Right.
But I think hoteliers now are much more open to that. They can see the sea change coming, and that convergence of services, the convergence of products. And those that are, who don't want to adapt, I think are going to find themselves, at a disadvantage.
Do you think that will be the biggest change in the next 10 years? Is that sort of increased flexibility of space? Because then you can change the use probably as well, right? You can tinker around. Maybe some is more co-working, and then you turn to something else, right? Because you increase the activity, then bring up the level, or you tune it down a bit, so you have flexibility around how you play with space as well.
I think so. I think that spaces are going to be designed to be more adaptable and flexible. But there's also, now recognition that hotels can't survive by being hotels alone. It has to be more. In this pandemic, you'll see that, hotels are adapting to be more than just hotels. They're being used as office space. They're being used as, as service apartments, for long stay guests, used as quarantine centers. So they're going to have to adapt. And I think that's going to be sort of permanent change moving forward.
Well, for the better, right? I mean, this
definitely for the better.
Commercially better. It's better for the
commercially.
Guests. It's better for the neighborhood.
It's definitely commercially better. You don't have all your eggs in one basket, and this has sort of made everybody realize, like, if this happens again, we're not going to be able to adapt as quickly.
Yeah, and you make better use of your real estate, right? Because in hotels, there's been a lot of wasted space where, like, from a real estate perspective, I guess some of the owners would scratch their heads like, why do we have this only busy once a day? All right. Closing out, last question. The one thing that a hotel designer needs to get ahead in the industry today, let's say maybe you're more junior or you're sort of like, middle, first half of your career. What does it take to get ahead?
I think it honestly, it all comes down to experiencing stuff, right? One of the great things about being in this industry is the fact that good and bad, is that we travel a lot. But because we travel a lot, we experience a lot, and we see a lot of different things, and we're able to take lessons that we learn in different countries and through different cultures and bring that home. So they do it this way, or this, why don't we think about doing it how these guys are doing it? And don't be too pigeonholed into what you think a hotel is, or what hospitality should be, or what a hotel room looks like. Be open to creating spaces that suit a guest's needs. So almost forget about what the definition of a hotel is. Design a space that people actually want to be in.
Right. And how good is it if you don't have any hotel background as a designer? Should you be? And we've seen this in a couple of times where it was Kengo Kuma or some guys come in, never did a hotel, and then he does a stellar job, right? How much is a designer's previous experience with hotels beneficial or detrimental to excelling?
That depends on the designer. So if you look at, I don't like to engage designers where they have a fixed style or their portfolio starts to look the same. I prefer to engage designers that have a varied experience. At the same time, I'm sometimes hesitant to hire a designer that has no hotel experience, because we're not going to be speaking the same language. When I would talk about, say, how a room is being used or concerns that the operators may have, they need to be able to understand that. So I think having a certain level of experience is important. Being open to listen to other people's experience is important. And so don't come in with any preconceived notions of what a hotel is, because the operator will tell you what the hotel really is, what that guest experience should be. I think regardless of whether you're a hospitality designer, commercial designer, residential designer, you should be open to criticism, open to other people's experiences and perspectives. I don't think that it's specific to hospitality designers, but with hospitality designers, they have to also understand that you're dealing with somebody that experiences your space, 3 to 4 days, and then they're gone. And so you have to be able to design a space that works for them, is extremely efficient, and leaves a lasting memory, because you want them to come back.
Lasting memories comes from good experiences. So on that note, we shall close. It was a great experience here.
This was fun.
Mama always said. On Peel Street, which is its own phenomenon. We didn't get to talk about this neighborhood, which has seen its own transformation and all that, but maybe that's for another time. Guys, hope you had fun. Julian, thanks a ton.
Thank you. This is
great having you, and we'll see you next time. Follow us on YouTube. Find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We're there. made-in.asia on our website. And see you next time. Thank you, guys.